What's up, brothers? I'm back again, and I want to talk to you guys about another African, a famous African king, a black man from the west coast of Africa. It's important that we know our history. It's important that we not rely on others to teach us our history. That's why I put it in your face like this. So I'm going to talk to you guys about a man by the name of, and the picture is on the thumbnail. And it's my understanding that that is an accurate depiction of this man. He was a king of the Djolof, the Bourba Djolof, and he reigned beginning in 1360. His name was Ndiadiane Ndiaye, and the French spelling of that it is Njajan Njie or Njajan Njie. And he was also known as Ahmad Abu Bakr, Omar, or Ahmad Ibn Aboubakar among the Wolofs, because according to Wolof oral tradition, the ancestor of the Wolof people. Now that name may sound familiar, but that was one of the famous people that we spoke about a week or two ago when we talked about the Almoravid movement, i.e. the Moors. So we are definitely on the same pace as we were before. But so a little bit about him, and I'm going to pull the screen up because I want you guys to see this screen. So based on Wolof oral tradition, it was initially believed that Ndiadiane Ndiaye was the son of Abu Bakr bin Omar, and you guys may remember him. This is the photograph that we saw, right? He was a prince, and he basically helped found he was a Almoravid leader, the king. So this is another black man. And so his son, this is allegedly, right? Remember, we talked about this. That's why it's important. Oh, Lord, I lost it. All right, there we go. So we talked about this, and this is why it's important that we keep up with these things. But either way, he was also known, he was an Almoravid warlord who was killed in November 1087 at the Fatamata Sal. Remember, this is the guy, if you guys recall, let me open it up because I want to make sure we get this right. This is the gentleman that he had the wife that was really smart, right? And she was the woman who he ended up marrying, and she ended up marrying his cousin who he put in charge and then went away to go fight some wars. So this black man right here is the father of this great Djolof king. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. And so we know his story already. We know the story of Abu Bakr. Anyway, Wolof oral tradition agrees with general accepted legend of Njaajaan Njaay in Senegambia, Gambia, but in some aspects disagrees with the tale in Wolof. Some have advanced the argument that his father was Lamane Bukar, derivatives of Bubakar and Bubakar, a Wolof from Wolo, and his mother was Fatomata Sal. Another version argues that the name Abu Bakr is a corruption of a Circer name, Bukar. So let's read a little bit about him. I want to kind of get to the meat of it. According to Professor Chiap Diop, you guys should know him. History teaches us that King Ndiadiane Ndiaye, the Djolof, the first king of the Wolof, had a tucacular mother and an Arab father, but there is evidence of contradiction here. The son of an Arab can hardly bear the Teutonic name Ndiaye, and is the common knowledge that both the surname and the first name of this king come from the exclamation "Ses Njajaan Njaay," meaning the expression calamity and or extraordinary. Professor G. Wesley Johnson has proposed that on behalf of the Wolof oral tradition, that and this is why the reason this is important is because many of us, having been captured from the west coast of Africa, many of us are part of the Wolof tribe, and so this is our history. These are our people, and so it's important that we understand this. So we'll just get straight to the shorter version of the legend. Initially bore the name Ahmad Abu Bakr. Others affirm that he received his name when he arrived with a triumph among the seer who shouted from then on, Njajan Njaay, meaning the brave man. Ndiadiane did not grow up with his father Abu Bakr, who was probably killed by an arrow of Soninki, an archer during a Morbid battle. That's a Moorish battle. So the Moors were trying to invade that part of their country. According to the tradition, during his youth, Ahmad did not accept the new marriage that his mother had contracted, having married a man of a captive origin, Mubarak, his father's former companion. For this reason, he fled the family home and took refuge in Wallo in the northwest of present-day Senegal, in the region of the river, or region of River. At this place, Ahmad stayed for more than 3 years in an aquatic cave located in the river. One day, an argument broke out between two fishermen on the bank river. To put an end to the quarrel, Ahmad rose from the waters and put an end to the quarrel. The population, having never seen him, was amazed by his sudden and miraculous exit, as much as by the wisdom with which he calmed the tensions. For these reasons, he was named the King of Wallo. A few years after his installation in power, a plot was organized against him. Having learned this, he left the region and settled in the Jollof. It was the Jollof that he founded the empire, bringing together the Lamanans, the landowners. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and read a little bit more about him. I want to first go ahead and let this video play, so we can learn a little bit about the rise and the fall of the Jollof. If you guys can hear me and you can hear this, make sure you hit the number 1 button. Fair use.
Hello, welcome to BioGreat TV. If you're new here, please subscribe and turn on the notification so you don't miss our next video. History of the Jollof Empire. The Jollof Empire, also called the Wolof Empire, was a West African state that ruled parts of Senegal from 1350 to 1549. After a long period of domination, this empire collapsed and was eventually conquered by the Imamate of Fouta Djallon in 1875, and by 1890, its territories were fully incorporated into French West Africa. The original Jollof state was formed probably as a result of the breakup of the Kingdom of Tekor and the demise of Malian power in the Senegambia region. By the
So as you guys see, this is the area. This area here was where many of our relatives are from. So it's important that you would know who this king is. This is, again, Black history does not start with the first African, slave being brought to the United States. It predates that. Here we are back in the 1350s. Okay, so this is why it's important. And it may seem boring, and I know you guys, I know you guys are like, well, we like talking about relationships and white women and black men, but we can't feed on that. There's nothing there, fellas. I mean, like, that's good conversation. It's fun. But for the most part, that doesn't help build you into the men that you want to be, the men who are storied, the men who have histories. Okay, so that's why this is important. But let's go ahead and continue.
Power in the Senegambia region. By the 16th century, 5 major states, Wallo, Kayor, Bao, Sine, and Salom, voluntarily pledged their allegiance to the Bourba, that is, the ruler of Jollof. According to traditional accounts among the Wolof, the founder of the state and later empire was Njaajaan Njaay. The legend of Njaajaan Njaay begins with a quarrel over wood near a big lake. Just before the dispute turned into violence, a stranger appeared from the lake. The stranger divided the wood fairly among the disputing parties and disappeared, leaving the people in awe. The people then feigned another dispute, and when the stranger appeared again, he was kidnapped. They offered him the kingship and a beautiful woman as wife. Convinced, this stranger became their king. When these events were recounted to the ruler of the Sine, a powerful magician himself, he is reported to have exclaimed Ndiadiane Ndiaye in his native Sera language in amazement. This exclamation became the stranger's name. His actual name was Ahmadu Abubakar ibn Muhammad, the ruler of the Kingdom of Sine. Maad,
Now, this is the gentleman we're talking about. He's incorporated into the legend of the Wolof Empire.
Sinig Maysa Wali then advised all rulers between the Senegal River and the Gambia River to voluntarily submit to the authority of this man, which they did. The new state of Jollof was under the Mali Empire for most of its early history. It became permanently independent during a succession dispute in 13.
Now, remember, the Mali Empire was ruled by the Malian kings, Abu Bakr II, and of course the Mansa Musa. So this is why all of this is related. So keep in mind, and if you guys need to go back and refresh your memories on what we've previously talked about, go ahead and do that. Thank you so much, James Morton. Please continue to contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal.
1360, between two rival lineages within the Mali Empire's royal bloodline. The Portuguese arrived in the Jollof Empire between 1444 and 1510 and left detailed accounts of a very advanced political system.
All right, so you see now, okay, the Portuguese arrived, right? Remember that they arrived, they struck a deal. At some point, sometime moving forward, they began to take slaves, take Africans from this region of the country and take them to Brazil in the West Indies, or the Caribbean was a place where many of these Wolof people, who we call the Wolof Empire, were taken from, right? So remember that.
Was a solid hierarchical system involving different classes of royal and non-royal nobles, free.
And then also the other point I wanted to make was these people, our African ancestors, they had a complicated political system. They weren't over there living in huts. They weren't living in, in mud huts. They weren't out there, cannibals. None of that. None of that was going on. And they knew that. But see, when they got us on those ships a few generations down the road, they would lie to us and tell, oh yeah, you people, you guys, you come from savages, blah, blah, blah. But you're here, you are hearing they had a complicated political system. So what does that mean? That means they had math, they had science, they had everything necessary. This was an advanced civilization under the Malian kings.
Men, occupational castes, and slaves. Occupational castes included blacksmiths, jewelers, tanners, tailors, musicians, and griots.
You hear that? The musicians, blacksmiths, tanners, tailors, and griots. And the African griot was an important person, and we probably should do a story on that. But the griot didn't just learn one subject. He learned history, plus he mastered math. I believe they had those guys study for decades before they could be deemed a griot. But let's continue.
Smiths were well regarded in the society because of their ability to make weapons of war. Griots were hired by important family as advisors and chroniclers, without whom much of early Jollof history will be unknown. The Jollof Empire was set up as 5 coastal kingdoms from north to south, which included Wallo, Cayo, Bao, Sine, and Kingdom of Salon. All of these states paid tribute to the landlocked state of Jollof.
Oh, looks like we froze.
The ruler of Jollof was known as the Bourba and ruled from Linguere, the capital. Each Jollof state was governed by its own ruler selected from the descendants of the founder of the state. State rulers were selected by the nobles, while the board was selected by a college of electors, which also included the rulers of the 5 kingdoms. Each ruler had practical autonomy but was expected to cooperate with the board on matters of defense, trade, and provision of revenue. Once appointed, Office holders were subjected to elaborate rituals to both familiarize themselves with their new duties and elevate them to a divine status. From then on, they were expected to lead their states to higher heights or risk being declared unfavored by the gods and being deposed. The stresses of this political structure resulted in a very autocratic government where wealth and personal armies held sway as against constitutional values. Peaceful trade relations were established between the Jollof Empire and the Kingdom of Portugal after an initially hostile start. At this time,
Okay.
Jollof was at the peak of its power, and the Boer had extended his.
All right. So you see, they were doing business with Portugal. This empire was doing business. They had agreements. They had written agreements. They were doing business with Portugal. Portugal knew who these European powers knew who these African powers were. These weren't savage people that they were pulling, folks out of and just pull. I want to show you a picture of what is a Jollof warrior. Okay. And I'm going to put this over here so you guys can see it. This is what a Jollof warrior looked like. Fully clothed, he had a horn, he had a hat, he had a rifle even. So these were not savages as they like to paint us out to be. Many of them were royalty, as they were pulled away from Africa and enslaved in chains and manacled. So, they were lying to us all these years about our people and where we came from. So let's continue.
Authority over the Malike state on the northern bank of the Gambia. In the 1480s, Prince Bemoy was ruling the empire on behalf of his brother Borbirao. Tempted by Portuguese trade, he relocated the seat of government to the coast to take advantage of the new economic opportunities. Other traditional princes, unhappy with this development, deposed and murdered the Boer in 1489. Prince Bemoy was forced to flee to the Portuguese for refuge, and they took him to Lisbon. There he received a good welcome and exchanged gifts with King John II and was baptized. Seeing an opportunity to put a Christian ally on the throne, John II sent an army under a Portuguese commander to put the prince back on the throne of Jollof. Unfortunately, that goal never materialized. A dispute arose between the commander and the prince, resulting to his death. Despite many
So you see, the Africans actually used the Europeans. They had European-backed Africans or European-backed kings and, basically local-backed kings. And they would use the armies of the Europeans to help them enforce their will against others. So they had relationships. They were paying tribute. These were complicated societies. So the next time somebody tells you about, those Africans we saved, we were fine the way we were. Okay, so let's continue moving forward.
internal feuds, the Jollof Empire remained strong within the region. In the early 16th century, it could field 100,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. But the seeds of the empire's destruction had already been planted by the prospect of Atlantic trade. Coastal trade, which had brought great wealth to the empire, turned out to be a major factor in its fall. The rulers on the states on the coast begetting the lions of the benefits, which eventually allowed them to undermine the power of the emperor. The breakup of the Mali Empire was another factor that led to the fall of the Jollof Empire. The breakup initially allowed Jollof to grow into an empire, but later the conflict also spread to territories in Jollof. In 15
And they're fighting over slavery. When they say this African brother who's doing the narrating, this is slavery that he's referring to. This is what was tearing those countries apart. Okay.
13, Dengela Koli led a strong force of Fulani and Mandinka into Futa Toro and successfully seized it from the Jollof. In 1549, Kayo broke away from the Jollof Empire under the leadership of the Crown Prince Amari Ngon Sobel. The breakaway state had grown in wealth and power, using its direct access to European trade as Jollof was landlocked and had no port. Cayo invaded its southern neighbor Bawol and defeated its overlord at the Battle of Danki in 1549. The defeat weakened the empire, resulting in other states leaving the empire. By 1600, the Jollof Empire was over. It had come to an end and reduced to a kingdom. Battles and wars continued between the noble rulers of the Jollof state until the late 19th century, when they were eventually subdued by the French. What have we missed out of this history? Let's know in the comments section. Will it be?
All right, so basically, let me summarize what he's saying. The Jollof Empire was a state on the west coast of Africa, located between the Senegal and the Gambia rivers, which thrived from the mid 14th century, which is like 1350, through to the mid 16th century, which is about 200 years later in 1550. The empire prospered on trade, often slave trade, thanks to two rivers providing access to resources of the African interior and coastal traffic commerce, which included gold, hides, ivory, and slaves, and which was often, and it was mostly slaves, which was often carried out with European merchants, notably the Portuguese and then the French following the breakup of the Wolof Empire, the 16th century. In the 16th century, the smaller state persisted. The Jollof Kingdom in the 19th century. The Wolof language is still widely spoken today in Senegal, Gambia, and Mauritania. Okay, so basically what this is telling you folks is that this thing broke up. Some wanted slaves, some didn't. It was a fight. It broke up. People couldn't come together on that because remember, they were at some point they were going in there and snatching up anybody they could off the west coast of Africa. The Wolof as a people inhabited from the first millennium BCE, the area between the Senegal River north of the Gambia River in the south. This West African region is often called Senegambia. Let me see if I can pull a photograph up because I want you guys to get a look at what we're talking about here. This is important for context. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is the area here, right? This territory had once been under the nominal control of the Mali Empire from 1240 to 1465. Mansa Musa, Abu Bakr II, all of those guys. After successful campaign of expansion, a general Taramagan, a general of Sundita Kita, the Mali king from 1230 to 1255. The Mali king, the relationship between the two states is unclear, but the Wolofs seem to have at least acknowledged the Mali kings as the main West African power. Wolofs' independence can be seen in the succession of their first king, Barabuda, a semi-legendary Ndiadiane Ndiaye, traditionally placed in the 13th century CE. And that CE means Common Era. Some people say AD, BC, but it's Common Era CE. But more likely to have been in the second half of the 14th century. In any case, civil wars, attacks from tribes such as the Mosai people, and the shift of lucrative trade routes meant that the Mali kings slowly lost their grip on the outer regions of the empire. Around 1468 CE, King Suni Ali, 1464-1494 of the Songhai Empire, then conquered the rump of the ailing Mali Empire. Okay, let me see if I can pull this up because I definitely want you guys to see this. This is important. Here's another map you can take a look at right here. And I'm gonna blow it up. This is how Africa was split up by Africans. All right, so up here you got the Songhai Empire, you got the Jollof Empire, you got the Ghanaian Empire, all of this up in here, Mali, all of this. This is where all our people were taken from, right? This is Togo, Benin, this is us. You see, this is where we were taken from for the most part. So this is why this is important. This is our history. You know, it's like somebody said, the bad guy said, I can speak Wolof. That's awesome, man. That's good for you. I uh, I'm happy to hear that. The West African region is often called, well, we went to that. The language and the pottery both suggest that the ancestors of the Wolof had originally migrated there from Central or Eastern Africa. They fished, they grew wet rice, and herded cattle, sheep, and goats, and later pigs. Now, if you guys subscribe to, you know, the theory put out by the Hebrew Israelites, what they'll say is that these Wolof people were actually Jewish people or Hebrews, and these people came from Eastern Africa. Okay, this is what they'll. This is something that they prescribe to, and that the people who were kidnapping them, the other Africans in that area, knew that they weren't from there, which is why they were quick to grab them up and sell them. They basically saying these Wolof people who existed right up in here, right, actually came from here and here. That's what they're saying. And so I understand their point of view, where they're coming from. They fished, they grew wet rice and herded cattle, sheep, and goats. They later used iron for tools, pottery, and jewelry. The people of this area of West Africa also set up megalithic monuments and burial markers. Circles were formed, some 8 millimeters and 26 feet in diameter stones, up to 4 meters in height. So let's see if we can get a photograph of that for you guys. Well, that ain't gonna work. I would have liked to have done that, but you can Google that real quick. West African mega monoliths. I'll see if I can pull a photograph up for you guys. But again, what you see is Black people, Africans living their life, not bothering anybody. You see them enjoying life. You see them not in need of what the Europeans were offering. And so the story that you hear about where Europeans are saying, oh yeah, you know, they needed us, blah, blah, it's not true. It's just not true. And so just keep that in mind. Those are lies. Circles, okay, so we talked about that. The Wolof eventually became the most powerful tribe south of the Senegal River. This territory had once been under the nominal control of the Mali Empire. Kind of talked about that. Let me see here. We talked about Ndiadiane Ndiaye. Okay, so let's see. Now let's talk about that. Then it was conquered the rump of the ailing Mali Empire. Okay, so this was eventually conquered. Let's find the Mali Empire here, which should be right there. This tail end was conquered by that king. The Songhai were only present south of the Gambia, and this permitted the Wolof in the north to exploit one of the few vacant areas the Songhai Empire did not control in West Africa, either through direct occupation or enforcement of tribute. So tribute is when you have to pay a stronger king or a stronger empire money, right? Basically, just like the mafia had people pay you for protection. Yeah, this is payment for protection. By the end of the 15th century CE, Common Era, the Wolof Empire consisted of 3 Wolof-speaking kingdoms of Kejor, Walo, and Bao. The states populated by speakers of Seer such as Sin Salam. Eventually, the Wolof kings expanded into the Malinka territory north of the Gambia River, which included the states of Nyambi, Badiwu, and Ninyana and Wuli. Consequently, the Wolof kings came to rule the whole of Senegambia. Okay, Senegambia. Although the state may better be described as a confederacy of tribute-paying kingdoms rather than an empire proper, as it often is called. The trade West Africa and Portugal. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the slave trade. The Wolof Empire was a major participant in the slave trade, exporting as much as 1/3 of all African slaves prior to 1600 CE. So what does that mean? That means, I mean, they were snatching up everybody. One third. This is amazing, right? This is where this is where a large percentage of our brothers and sisters were taken from. You see? And so because of that, we have a direct ancestry with this. And so we should definitely be interested in the Wolof tribe, right? But let's read that again. The Wolof Empire was a major participant in the slave trade, exporting as much as 1/3 of all African slaves prior to 1600 CE. This trade declined in the 17th century as Senegambia became a thoroughfare of slaves from the interior of Central Africa rather than the source of them. So what this is translating to is, by the time the 17th century had rolled around, they had snatched so many Black Africans from the West Coast that it just basically became a highway. They would now go to Central Africa. They were now going to Central Africa here. Oh, let me pull this up so you guys can see. They had snatched so many people from here. They now had to go to Central Africa to pull Black slaves out, African slaves out. That's how ruthless it has become. Thanks to and that's what happened. Thanks to the mighty, remember, like I told you guys before, you know, anybody could get it. They were snatching anybody up, you know, and that's why when I talk to my Hebrew Israelites brothers, like, you know, I hear you and it sounds good, like a nice, clean theory, but capitalism ruled this day. It didn't matter who you were. If somebody could get paid by stealing you and throwing you on a boat, they would. You know, money, in this case, trumped God and what God's orders were. Thanks to the mighty Senegal River, which extends hundreds of kilometers into the African interior, the Wolof were in position to trade all manner of goods besides slaves, and these included hides, cotton, textiles, gum, ivory, cola nuts, salt, horses, indigo, and beeswax. So let me see this river. It's a river in here. This river's all the way up in here. They could basically sail all the way from the coast up in here. And so, you know, they didn't have to walk it out. Like people said, well, how can they walk all the way? No, they sailed in there, hopped off the boat, grabbed up as many people as they could, put them back on the boat. The Wolof also had their own manufacturers to transform raw materials into even more valuable goods. The Wolof goldsmiths and workers enjoyed an especially high reputation across West Africa. The major commodity traded through Wolof territory was gold, the precious metal so beloved by the Europeans who were beginning to take serious interest in Africa south of the Sahara, come from the inland Bambouk gold fields and eventually found its way to the coast. The Portuguese began trading up and down the coast of West Africa in the mid-15th century. The adventurer Diego Gomez established trade relations with the Wolof in 1455 CE, and trade blossomed between two powers. Gifts were exchanged between the King of Portugal, John II, and the Wolof, and the Christian missionaries were received. So the thing you got to also remember, many of these folks in the Congo and some of these places, they began to send their royalty to Europe to get educated. It was specifically something that was happening amongst the people in the Niger Congo or the Congo region of it, to the point that they would even name their children or name themselves in Portuguese names. The trade with the Portuguese became so lucrative in 1480 that the Wolof king Bourba Djolof even shifted his capital nearer to the coast. However, not everyone was happy with the welcoming of the missionaries, and the traditionalist princes led a revolt which toppled Bourba Djolof in 1483. 89. Now, mind you, we're only 3 years away from 1492, when, you know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Barrow's brother, Prince Bimoa, was forced to flee the country, but he was given a splendid welcome in Lisbon, which is in Portugal, the capital of Portugal, where he was even baptized. By 1490 CE, the Portuguese were ambitious to control directly trade goods, and particularly gold, from their sources in Africa's interior. They sent a military expedition against the Wolof king and backed Prince Bimoa to take the throne. In other words, they got this guy who had fled. They sent their military expedition to back against the Wolof king who had kicked him out, and they backed Prince Bimoa, who basically had gone to Lisbon to get away, right? And because now what? Now he's beholden to them. So you guys can't get along. Don't worry about it. We'll help you get back in power. Oh yeah, okay. Now that we got you back in power, well, now it's time for you to help us out. We want to lock down this. So we want to control this trade goods, specifically this gold that y'all got down there. And you're beholden to us. So what do? They exploited a conflict between two African princes, probably who were related, by the way. You see, so that's an interesting. One thing you guys should also know is back on the slave thing, and we're about to get to that. Most of the Senegal slaves were imported to South Carolina, Georgia, and the Gulf Coast, followed by Virginia and Maryland. So if you have relatives from there, it's more likely than not these politics going on at this time in this region of Africa directly affected your ancestors. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you got relatives in South Carolina, Georgia, and the Gulf Coast, like Louisiana, Virginia, or Maryland, the politics that were going on in 1490 with these two kings this affected you. All right. So the expedition, despite involving 20 carnival ships, proved a failure because of the disease, a serious disagreement between the pretender and his European backers, which led to the former's death. Thereafter, the Portuguese remained within their fortified trading posts along the coast as trade continued through the 16th century. The Wolof state. So they still was selling slaves, and black folks. Portuguese contact at least gives us some information on the Wolof state. We know that the king was elected by a council of elders from candidates who belong to a certain ancestry, most likely the actual founder of the Wolof state. And we talked about that in Johnny. This is why he's important. Some members of this council. Am I boring you guys? If I'm boring you guys, I can stop right now. I got other stuff to do. If you appreciate what I'm doing, hit the #1 button. I hope you appreciate this. If you do appreciate it, hit the #1 button. Let me know. Make sure you hit the like button also. Let me see here. Come on, hit the #1 button if you appreciate what I'm doing. Some members of the council were rulers of the individual states within the Wolof Confederacy. Wolof society was hierarchical, with several distinct classes. The royal family was at the top. The non-royal nobles, often the children of secondary wives and concubines of royalty, and free men. The latter category was further divided into castes depending on the man's occupation, such as blacksmith, jeweler, tailor, griots, epic storytellers, and musicians. At the bottom of society were slaves doing wars and raids in neighboring territories, who were themselves divided into strata with skilled slaves at the top and unskilled agricultural laborers at the bottom. There was also a class of military slaves, the Cedo, which the elite used to enforce the payment of tribute and police other slaves. The religion of the elite, at least nominally, was Islam due to its spread by the Berber traders, clerics, and missionaries. In contrast, most of the ordinary people remained close to their traditional animist beliefs. So what is this saying? Basically, what it's saying is the elite people, yeah, they're Islamic. Islam was the religion of the elite, but the country people, they still held on to their traditional African beliefs. But even these elite, they weren't fully indoctrinated in it. They just kind of played along because the Muslims were a powerful source. Okay, and so what you have to understand is, at a certain point, the Islamic scholars that we've discussed already on the page here basically took a stand and said, hey, you can't use this whole notion of the Hamid curse and take these Africans away. You have black theologians like Abdullah ibn Yasin, and more important, Ahmad Baba, leader of the Songhai Empire, who said, hey, you cannot take these Africans because these Africans are Muslim. Now you can take those Africans over there. He even listed a group of Africans that you could and could not take. What I'm going to do for you guys is I'm going to put in the chat room the discussion that we had about Ahmad Baba, the leader of the Songhai Empire, who was a black man, an African man, but also a Muslim scholar who basically wrote the pamphlet, wrote the rules on who could be stolen and who could not be stolen. And so it basically, he allowed the religion to divide us. So when this is important because, see, the religion of the elite, at least nominally, was Islam due to its spread by the Berber traders and clerics and missionaries. In contrast, most of the ordinary population remained close to their traditional animist beliefs, basically their traditional African beliefs. So this was the cause, for at least initially, for why these Africans were allowed to be. Yeah, you had slaves, but you also had folks like this who said, well, go out there and get some of those people. The rich people basically, yeah, we'll make a deal, but you go get some of them slaves from that village over there because they don't believe in Islam. And you had scholars like Ahmed Baba, leader of the Songhai Empire, who backed that up. And so he existed at about the same time as these folks did. And so it's important to understand that was the impetus behind, that was the politics surrounding why some were targeted and some weren't. The other people, they was just taken at a certain point, they was just snatching everybody up. But let's continue. In the last quarter of the 16th century, another major power arrived in the region, the French. The French traders brought with them such highly desirable items as textiles from northern France, spirits, which means alcohol, metal goods, pepper, palm oil, and firearms. The Portuguese soon lost their trade advantage, especially as the export of much in-demand firearms to Africa was prohibited by the Portuguese crown. Why would you give guns to the people you're trying to enslave? So they didn't do that. The Portuguese didn't want to go. Most of the European powers had an argument about why would we give guns to people that we're saying is inferior, because right now that whole their inferior thing was in full swing. All right, by 1650 it was in full, 1550 was in full, 1550 it was in full swing. So why would you arm these people that we got to turn right back around and try to go kidnap and bring to the new world? They had islands and countries that they were trying to exploit, and they needed the slave labor. But what happened was, because France was willing to give those Africans guns, consequently, the French gained control of such towns as Gori, Pordula, Jao, Rusuke, all in the Jala territory. The Europeans' presence was such that populations in urban areas along the Atlantic coast eventually became mixed African and French, as seen, for example, the port of St. Louis. Now, when they say mixed African French, that don't mean they had a bunch of French women coming down to the Atlantic coast of Africa. That's not what was happening. It was a bunch of French men having sex with African women, oftentimes having them as second wives, if you want to call that. So the lovely ladies was busting it open for the French, and they've been doing it a long time. So when you hear stuff about, oh, we've been loyal, this is not true. Women are not race loyal. They are loyal to their own survival. And so this is another example, and I believe the book Daughters of the Trade talk about that, because oftentimes what would happen is some of these African families would support these European slave owners, European slave catchers, European slave traders in their endeavor, and they would prosper from it. But the fact that they mentioned the fact that some of the urban areas along the Atlantic coast eventually became mixed African and French, it just lets you know how rampant it was. As seen at, for example, the port of St. Louis, by the end of the 16th century, the English and the Dutch were also significant trading in the presence of the region. Gold and slaves of Africa proved just irresistible to them as French and Portuguese. So the Dutch, we heard about them, right? We know what they've done. We know that, they had the wives there. Again, those of you all who read Daughters of the Trade, you understand that. So this was something that was common. They would, Black African women and the European men, they get together, have babies, become families, make money in the trade of other Africans. What happened? The trade might have been booming, but the Wolof Empire itself began to disintegrate as early as the mid-16th century, breaking up into a number of successor states, which included what is today referred to as the Wolof Kingdom. The initial breakup was likely caused by coastal towns growing so rich on the slave trade, right, that they sought to break away from the central Wolof monarchy. So basically, you got people being so rich, we don't need you anymore. This is how much money, this is how much they were, generating, from the sale, theft of other Africans. Indeed, these provinces were the first to claim their independence. So everybody on the coast is getting rich quick. We don't need y'all no more. We good. We got guns, we got gold, we got everything we need. The Wolof were also weakened by the rise of the militaristic Fulani, first led by Koli Tingila, all right, Fulani. Let's look that up at some point. We'll talk about that. I'll explain that to you guys and what happened there. But in the meantime, just understand that they was having problems. Who set up his state to Futu Tora, a territory around the middle section of the Senegal River. The group of now desperate states in the Senegambia, split between speakers of Wolof and Serer, was composed of Walo, Kayer, Bawal, Sin, Salam, and the Wolof Kingdom. Unfortunately for it, the only one without access to the coast. All right, so now let's talk about what happened when Islam came in. If y'all listening, thank you, Chris York. If you guys are listening, hit the #1 button. Let me know you're listening. Let me know you appreciate this conversation. I hope you do. The successor of it, and again, the reason why this is important, okay, and I'm gonna go back over this again. This is where our African ancestors were taken from, more or less. All up in here, really. I mean, they were at a certain point, everybody was getting snatched up. But early on, this is where they were taking our brothers and sisters from. And so all of this here, right, especially in the Senegambia, this is where a third of the Africans were snatched away from. And so this is our story, brothers. This is that Black history. This is that African history that we didn't learn about. And I think it's important for us to learn about it. That's why I'm taking the time to go just lay it out here for you. You don't have to do the research. If you appreciate this, hit the #1 button. Let me know. That's what I'm asking you guys to do. If you appreciate what I'm doing, hit the #1 button. That's all I ask. Despite the political upheaval from the Senegal River, though the Senegal River remained what it always had been, a vital thoroughfare into and out of Africa's interior, okay? And this is important to remember. See, you didn't have to walk into the interior of Africa. You could sail along that river, get as far in there as you wanted to, put the captured Africans and other goods on your boats and sell them back to the coast. 1,000 miles. Sorry about that. I had to take a little break. The small kingdoms saw their rulers establish lucrative monopolies on the trade of such high-value goods as slaves. They slaves. These are our own African brothers selling us. Okay, keep that in mind. That's the most important thing I want you to understand, and I'm gonna keep driving this point home. My man IR2 said there should be more brothers in here. Honestly, this is really tragic in my book. Don't worry about that, man. As long as you guys are here. And see, as long as you guys appreciate what I'm doing, I'm gonna keep doing. We got one donation here. We got Damon J. We got Blaise. We got my man INIR2, James Morton. Not all of them are gonna be interested. But what we're learning here, family, is that they have always used monetary incentives to keep blacks divided. We're so easily bought. And what happens is when you have a me first attitude, you know, when you have a I'm gonna get the bad culture, you'll do anything, even sell your own flesh and blood into slavery, which is what our brothers and sisters did. And so that is something that needs to be addressed. And so I'm just simply driving this point home. See, for years, we've refused to accept the fact that we as Africans played a major role in capturing our own brothers and sisters and sending them over here. And it wasn't just those tribes that didn't practice Islam. It was also people who they could grab and hold at a certain point, because remember, they wanted money. At some point, they just wanted to, they were getting rich. As these people say, the small kingdom saw their rulers establish lucrative monetary monopolies on trade of such high-value goods as slaves and firearms. Indeed, the region was siphoning off so much trade previously controlled by the North African states that their middlemen, the Saharan Berbers, that the latter Marabout, or religious leader Nasir al-Din, launched a holy war in 1673 as the UNESCO General History of Africa. Okay, so think about that. North African states, their middlemen, the Saharan Berbers, that the latters of the Marabout, or religious leader, they launched a holy war. It's crazy, right? But let's continue. The proclamation of war was motivated by both economic and religious considerations. Economic meaning they making more money than us on selling these slaves. Consideration to reconquer the trade and to gain into grain, trade in grain and slaves, and to convert the peoples and the pure. See, this is the rhetoric. Okay, so this is what you're really doing it for trade, right? You're really doing it. So let's read this again. I want you guys to understand. Indeed, the region was siphoning off so much trade previously controlled by North African states that their middlemen, the Saharan Berbers, that the latter's Marabout, or religious leader Nasir al-Din, launched a holy war in 1673, as the UNESCO General History of Africa, Volume 5 summarizes. All right, this is our history right here. This is, they were making so much money they fought over it. Isn't that crazy? The proclamation of war was motivated by both economic and religious considerations to reconquer the trade in grain and slaves, and to convert the peoples and purify the practice of Islam from being the religion of the minority caste of merchants and courtiers in the royal courts. In other words, so when people say a lot of our brothers and sisters were Muslim over there, that's not necessarily true. Okay, what they're saying is that was a minority religion. Islam was a minority religion in West Africa, at least at that time. And it was the religion of the people in the cities. It wasn't the religion of the country people. It wasn't the religion of the Africans. They had their own traditional African beliefs. So, you know, it's, yeah, we had, you know, Muslims, but they were not, they had their own traditional African beliefs. They were not majority Islam at that point. Um, you know, but really from being, they wanted to go from it being the religion of the minority caste of merchants and courtiers and royal courts, basically the sophisticated rich people. It was becoming a popular resistance movement against the arbitrary power of the ruling uh, um, and against the noxious effects of the Atlantic trade. Consequently, with the support of the people, those already converted to Islam, the war resulted in the sweeping away of the ruling elite in many of the successor kingdoms of the Wolof Empire. The new regimes became Muslim theocracies, but they did not last long. With the death of Nasir al-Din in 1674, numerous defeats, and the French intervening in support of the kingdoms and the Berbers were pushed back, and the Holy War fizzled out. The successor kingdoms, far from taking this as a timely reminder of their weakness as a small competing states, continued to bicker and fight again amongst themselves. Popular movements rallied around the idea to spread Islam, and the kingdoms, beset by the other problems such as a series of famines, disintegrated as political entities by the beginning of the 18th century. The Wolof people were still actively in the coastal trading in the mid 18th century. So they were still trading slaves in the mid 18th centuries. But the region became increasingly dominated by the French from early 19th century, and they and the other European powers now took direct control from military conquest of parts of Africa that interested them. The Wolof language, however, far outlasted the empire of the kingdom, and is today the official language of Senegal, along with French, and is widely spoken in several other West African states. So this is interesting for those of you who are interested in African history. I'm going to give you some more interesting stuff that I think you guys will enjoy. So when you Google the term Wolof language, right, in the Americas, right, some interesting things pop up. Okay, this is, you know, I want you guys to, I'm gonna bring it home now. How many, let me see, I want to pull it up for you guys. You want to, again, let me remind you that a third of the Africans before 1600 came through that kingdom, you see? And so because of that, it's very likely, and many of them went to Georgia, many of them went to many of the Gulf Coast areas. And so because of that, this is something that we should pay attention to, okay? But I'm looking for, I had this earlier, and my God, I can't believe it. I'm gonna have to post it up later on. But for the most part, you know, I think the lessons that we learn here are as follows. First, it was a complicated society. That's the first thing we want to understand. They weren't living in mud huts. They weren't savages. The Europeans had a relationship with the Wolof and these folks on the west coast of Africa for hundreds of years before they began capturing slaves. The Wolof people, these West African tribes here, noted here, they played a significant role in the capture of Africans and shipping them to the United States, or shipping them to the Western Hemisphere. So their hands are not clean, right? We can't just blame the white man, because you know, they wouldn't have been able to get us had it not been for the help of our own brothers and sisters. Okay, so that's the thing you need to understand. Now, where did those Senegalese slaves go? I think I kind of pulled that up. Here it is. I'm gonna pull this up for you guys to look at. If you just ask yourself, where did those Wolof Senegalese, where'd they go? Most of the Senegalese slaves were imported to South Carolina, Georgia, and the Gulf Coast, highlighting his number in Louisiana, followed mainly by Virginia and Maryland. Let's take a look at, does Senegal have, well, that's not, how many, what country did African slaves come from? All right, so let's take a look at the volume of transatlantic slave trade by region of embarkation in the thousands. From 1519 to 1700, the majority of the people enslaved in the New World came from West and Central Africa. Before the 1519, all Africans carried into the Atlantic disembarked at old world ports, mainly Europe and offshore Atlantic islands. Let me see here. So, you know, this is information you guys would want to know. But either way, I appreciate you guys for being here. My man, Alexis says, I'm very interested in discussion. Appreciate the late night history lessons. Hey, man, you know, I think it's being helpful. I think it'd be great to have more people in here, but that's okay. You guys can catch this out in the morning. I hope that you guys appreciate if you appreciate what I'm doing, hit the number 1 button, hit the like button. I hope so. I'm really just trying to help people get a good grasp of what's actually going on. If you appreciate what I'm doing, also please contribute to the super chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. It's very interesting, you know, when you just look at history for what it is and take the emotion out of it. You know, I think week after week here today, I've proven to you guys that, you know, our own brothers and sisters, despite what you've heard, despite what we would like to think, the majority of our people in Africa played a serious part in our capture. And I know that's not something that people want to believe, but it's just facts. You know, our own Black African brothers and sisters benefited from our capture and sale to European slave traders. And at a certain point, they knew exactly what they were doing. That's the other thing. We often like, well, they don't know what they were doing. Yeah, they did. It's been going on long enough that they did know what they were doing. You had people going and coming back and going and coming back and telling stories. And so you can't lie. You know, these are advanced societies. These are people that, you know, they had sophisticated political systems. They knew exactly what was going on. You know, and they were doing it because they wanted money, you know, and they did it for the money. They were easily divided by the money. So you can't, at this point, how much longer are we going to deny the truth? As a matter of fact, here's the crazy thing. Many of those who were captured had participated in the slave trade themselves. They captured other Africans, and then at some point somebody captured them. You know, they were home counting their slave money from their slave proceeds, and somebody broke into their home and took them and took their children away. So everybody could get it, you know? So just in case you guys need some more information, I'm going to put this in the link. I want you to check this out on your own, just so you know how real this is, right? We just finished talking about the Wolof or Jollof people, right? And I'm going to share something with you. Thank you so much, Vernon King. Not everybody appreciates this, but this is how real this is. You know, we've been a lost people for a long time. only because we haven't had folks sit down and lay this out for us. But I'm going to read this to you. African American history is the portion of American history that specifically discusses African American or Black American ethnic group in the United States. Most African Americans are the descendants of African slaves held in the United States from 1619 to 1865. Others who are considered African American by the U.S. government include voluntary immigrants from Africa, South America, and the Caribbean. African American history is celebrated in the United States during Black History Month. The majority of African Americans descended from slaves that were either sold or prisoners of war by stronger African states or kidnapped directly by Europeans and Africans. The former was far more common, right? Prisoners of war, in other words, African folks kidnapped up, that was far more common than the latter. An already existing market of slaves in Africa was put to full advantage by the European powers in need of labor for New World plantations. Here's the kicker, folks. The American slave population was made up of various ethnic groups from these regions, including Bakongo, Igbo, Mandi, and Wolof, among the Akan, the Fan, the Maku, amongst others. So it's right here, the politics affecting what we were talking about today, right, is the reason why you are here right now. Now, once mixed together in the Americas, these different peoples began to forge a new history and a culture based on their similarities. So, you know, folks, this is us. You know, this is us. And we should learn our own history, not wait for others to teach it to us. And the more you learn, the more you understand. I don't really want to beleaguer the point, but again, our own people played a part in us being captured. They did it for the money. It is what it is. But either way, thank you guys so much. If you appreciate what I'm doing, I know this is boring. This is not exciting. I'm sure you brothers rather me get on here and tell you why, you know, Black American women should be treating you better. I'm sure you'd like me to get on here and tell you all the reasons why you should travel overseas, and how nice it is to be, you know, sitting on a beach with some beautiful woman. I get that, but that's fluff. It's fun, but I think helping you build your historical knowledge of your own ancestry, I think that's more fulfilling. Because see, you're not going to remember the current social state as it is right now, but you will always remember that time you sat up that one spring evening, a little past your normal bedtime, and talked about the history of the Wolof Empire. That's what I think. I think that you'll be able to tell your grandchildren these stories. I think this may even promote your decision to go learn on your own. I think that this is enriching. I think that the fact that you have names and locations makes Africa take on a whole nother meaning for you. The fact that you know the vast majority of those Africans taken from the Wolof tribe were brought to Georgia and South Carolina and Louisiana will make you look a little differently at your relatives in those states, okay? So, you know, it's not fun. Nobody really likes history until you truly understand it and when you can begin to glean lessons from it. What's the lesson that we can learn? Greed is what the Europeans did. They exploited our greed and our selfishness. And so can we really be angry with them? They paid our brothers to sell us into slavery, just like Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. So who are we going to be mad at? The person who bought us or our brothers who sold us into slavery? Think about that. I hope this makes you take another look at the relationship that you have, at least the historical relationship that we have with Europeans. Somebody was going to buy us, but it was our own brothers that initiated the process, our own brothers and sisters who played a part in this. And so when we talk about the atrocities of slavery, yes, we definitely need to hold the European powers accountable for what they sanctioned, the Catholic Church, those other religions. But we cannot allow those predecessors of those nations, which are now on the west coast of Africa, to escape responsibility for what they've done to us, i.e., sent us off here with strangers away from home, our African home, for money. They did it for money. They did it for money. It wasn't because, oh, we had slaves here. No, they did. They at some point they began to capture everyone. You know, and it's plain and simple. Good old-fashioned gold, good old-fashioned greed, right? But anyway, thank you guys so much. My man John Guillory said, thanks, Dennis. This is the most Black history I've learned about our people from anyone else on YouTube. Well, I try to do it, and I try to make it in an exciting way, and I try to give you lessons from it. I don't want to just throw stuff out there at you. But the one thing is, folks, don't romanticize Africa as much as you have, because if it wasn't for our ancestors selling us over here, we wouldn't be here. We had stuck together and said, nah, we're not doing that. We're not selling y'all. Y'all not. It damn near broke Africa. You took so many people from the west coast of Africa. Nobody else said. You just became a thoroughfare. You just became a highway. Ain't nobody else here. We got to go dig deeper in Central Africa. It just became a thoroughfare. And so Africa's still suffering from that decision, that greed of our ancestors 300 years ago, 400 years ago. Africa's still suffering. And, you know, something to think about. But either way, thank you guys for the time you've spent. I hope you share this. I hope you like it. Please critique it. I look forward to, yeah, and our Alexis is right. It was men and boys in large numbers who were sent to be worked to death, because there was never any intention to have a permanent African population anywhere in the Western world. The idea was to work these boys to death, work these men to death, get rid of them. You know, they didn't start bringing women over until 400 years after slavery started in any considerable amount. And that was only after it was at the point that they needed workers, but slavery was about to be, the transatlantic slave trade was about to be eliminated or made illegal by European powers. So what did they do? They said, well, hell, we got to bring some of these gals over here to breed them up. And that's exactly what they did. And it was at that point, you know, the population began to grow. But before that, it was just Black men, to the tune of 80 to 90% of Black men, and a few girls here to do housework. So, you know, brothers did this time by themselves, man. But again, there was never any intention. It was always intended for this to be a white man's country, specifically the United States. Either way, you know, God bless you all. I love you. It's late night. If you appreciate what I'm doing, make sure you contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. And other than that, as I always say at this time, this is Uncle D, and I am out.